The media will meet some assistant coaches today, some new assistant coaches. We have questions. Do they have answers? We'll find out.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins.
All right, welcome in Wednesday edition of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I am Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone is with me today. The media gets to say hello to and ask questions of three new Nebraska assistant coaches. You got Phil Snow, the associate head coach. You got Phil Simpson, the outside linebackers coach, and Daikiel Shorts, the new wide receivers coach. So it's the Phil, and Daikiel show. Pretty simple.
The three S's, the Simpson,
is
Snow, and Shorts.
Yeah, I was wondering if maybe they were doing this in alphabetical order when Nebraska lined this thing up. But that doesn't seem to be the case because we've got coaches next week on both sides. So I think they just took an interesting trio and put three interesting like comparisons between these coaches and put them together today. Next week we'll get Mike Eckler, Addison Williams, and Terry Bradden. So another interesting trio, but pretty simple from us today. What we're going to do in this show is talk about what we would like to learn from these three. They've had, as I mentioned, varying levels of coaching experience, varying levels of exposure to Nebraska, and varying levels of connections to this staff. And they have vastly different roles within the team in 2025. So that's part of what makes this day interesting to me in Lincoln as we move ahead closer to spring practice is that these three are nothing alike.
Right. Yeah. And so if we start with Daikiel Shorts, I think that might be the name that people are most excited about. I don't know. Where do you think you're at on that one? Before,
as far as like the new names, I mean, we've all heard about Phil Snow before, and I don't know if people are excited about Phil Snow. Matt Rhule is, but Mike Eckler, I think, is probably the name that people are maybe most excited about. But yeah, Daikiel Shorts is intriguing, and tell us a little bit about him and why he's intriguing.
Well, I mean, he's first of all, I think from my standpoint, he is handpicked by Dana Holgorsen, right? So that's I feel like a marriage that will have to be asked about quite a bit today. And he's had some success at developing wide receivers over his short period of time coaching. The guy that's name comes to the forefront is Tank Dell, who's now a successful but injured wide receiver for the Houston Texans. And then did a really good job with at Kentucky this past year with guys like Dane Key and Hardly Gilmore. And so there's already some connections to some people on the roster, and there's already there's that history with Dana Holgorsen, and he's a young up and coming coach. It seems he's only 30 years old. I mean, there's kind of a lot in there for the short time he's been an assistant coach at the collegiate level.
Yeah, the more that you look into Daikiel Shorts, I think the more excited you can get, or the more intrigued you can be about him. So he went to West Virginia from Houston, went to West Virginia, played 4 seasons, led the Mountaineers in receiving yardage in 3 of those seasons, was a captain in 2016, second team All Big 12, had nearly 900 receiving yards that year. He caught 45 balls as a freshman, which I think is interesting and plays into part of what I want to talk to him about today. Undrafted out of Morgantown, spent a short time with the Buffalo Bills, then got into coaching, was a support staffer for Dana Holgorsen at West Virginia and with Houston. And then in 2021, took over the wide receivers at Houston. As you mentioned, Connor, Tank Dell had a big season in 21, an even bigger season in 2022. He led the country in receiving yardage, touchdowns, and receptions over those 2 years. Tank Dell did, that he worked with Daikiel Shorts. Also, he had Matthew Golden in 2022, who set Houston's true freshman receiving record and tied for the nation lead with 7 touchdown catches that season. So, and this is Daikiel Shorts doing this when he's 26, 27 years old.
Yeah.
Last year at Kentucky, Dane Key had 47 catches for 715, and then they all packed up and came to Lincoln when Dana Holgorsen called in December. Shorts was with Nebraska in bowl prep, so he's had a head start on getting to know this receiving core, which is totally made over. The receiving core, you do have some young pieces back, players who redshirted last year, but for the most part, it is a new group, and there will be new expectations, new leadership, new everything for Nebraska when spring camp opens on March 24th.
Yeah, that's kind of where I start. I'm glad that there's at least a little bit extra familiarity with the people, or with the people that he's going to be coaching. But also, you had a couple of them at Kentucky last year. But I mean, this will be something that'll be asked, I'm sure, right off the bat today. Hey, I mean, what's your initial impression of sort of the room? Because it's an interesting one, and people coming from various different places, and then a guy that for whatever reason we just haven't talked about really the entire offseason, that people should be excited about really is Ja'Cory Barney.
I knew you were going to say that.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like that guy is on a total Star Trek, and he's the conversation is about the wide receiver coach and then the guys that came in from other programs, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, when I was saying that about it being everything new and a totally new made over room, there should have been like a little fact check thing above my head if you're watching here on YouTube. It said Ja'Cory Barney was a key piece of the Nebraska receiving core in 2024, and he's back. And he's a guy that Dana Holgorsen, before Daikiel Shorts even became a part of this conversation, like Holgorsen was coaching Barney, and he started in that connection started out in LA at the USC game. And then, of course, 3 more games. Holgerson's the one who brought up the Tank Dell comparison. He said that he has told Ja'Cory, you can be like Tank Dell. And from a body type and physicality standpoint, toughness in a small package, the speed, quickness, the kind of plays that Nebraska is going to want to use and has used Ja'Cory Barney on to be featured in this offense. It's reminiscent of Tank Dell. And now that you have the head coach from Tank Dell's time at Houston and the receivers coach, I'll bet Barney is excited about that. And yeah, Barney, to me, we are overlooking him. He should be someone that we're talking about, and probably one of the players who I would say now, after the last 90 seconds, am most excited about hearing from in the spring, because as a Miami guy, and like he has the confidence and the swag of a Miami guy. He's fun to talk to too. Like he's going to say more than just the standard football cliches about what he thinks he can be and what he thinks this offense can be.
Yeah, I mean, think about it, not to make this an entire Ja'Cory Barney topic, but it's his angle on it is really kind of interesting. I mean, he was one of the guys on the team last year who is coming back for 2025 that everyone would unequivocally say, like, you don't need to touch that. Everything was good with that. Like, please bring him back, whatever. Like, there probably wasn't more than a handful of guys like that on the team, just considering how high people's expectations are for whoever they see playing football. But then everything changed around him in the offseason. And that's, one of the people obviously that's going to be in charge of that is talking today. And I don't know what it is, bitch. Like, I don't know why this happens, but there are just people that, like, there are assistant coaches who, maybe it comes from their playing career, but like at this age, he's 30. Daikiel Shorts. You're able to sort of like identify, whoa, this guy could be like a really good coach. And I think the recruiting aspect probably comes first. How are you able to connect? And then if the coaching part, checks out, which is a moving target, right? But if the coaching part checks out, they're like, whoa, this guy's got a chance to be like really, really good. I think people are sort of pegging him as the guy with a lot of upside on this staff.
Sorry, I went with a Marquise Step reference there on the
30.
30. Yeah, I mean he absolutely put him there with Rob Dvorak. Like these are the if Daikiel Shorts was a few months younger, that these guys could both make like the 30 under 30 as far as the top young assistant coaches in college football, and they still do, just because Daikiel has had that birthday. So I'm looking at this group of receivers, and Barney is the second most experienced receiver at Nebraska as far as experience in Lincoln. You have Janiron Bonner, who's ahead of him, and then everybody else is younger. Everybody else is a redshirt freshman or sophomore, or there's some walk-ons who were part of the roster. That's it. Other than Barney, so they're going to have to rely a lot, of course, on Ja'Cory, and then it's the new guys for Daikiel Shorts. So how does he incorporate Daikiel? Well, I think we'll get some answers about Daikiel, and the expectation is that he's going to step in, or has stepped in already, and played the role of a leader in Lincoln. And then the other pieces, Nizia Hunter, is he turning heads in the mat drills as they get started and in winter conditioning? We want to know about Hardly Gilmore. Daikiel Shorts can talk to us about that. And then these freshmen that they have on campus right now, Isaiah Mosey, Jeremiah Jones is not here yet. Cortez Mills. What's going to happen with them? Like, does Daikiel Shorts envision Cortez Mills being the kind of guy who can come in and catch 7 touchdowns as a true freshman, like he had with Matthew Golden, Shorts had with Matthew Golden at Houston in 22?
Intriguing. And as we've been talking about all offseason, Mitch, with the roster and how it's cut down and all these things, I would generally think that, if the red shirt thing is probably not a direction you're thinking of heading with those couple of guys, but obviously it depends on what happens in front of them. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and he'll be speaking today. Phil Simpson, Phil Snow, the Phils, the PSs. We got to ask them some questions as well. We'll continue on in the Locked On Nebraska podcast. But first, a word from our friends from the FanDuel Sportsbook. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting underway, and there's no better place to get in on that action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So if you missed the opening tip-off, you're too late. Game tips off at 7. It's 7:05. It doesn't matter. You're not locked out completely. The live betting options are still there, and the same game parlay options during live betting are still there as well. So you can do that even after the game is underway, even if you have missed the beginning of it. And you might be able to have a better feel on the direction the game is headed. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just head to FanDuel.com and join today. FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, welcome back. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you here on this Wednesday. Phil Simpson is another guy that we'll be talking today. Young assistant coach, played defensive line for Temple from 2004 to 2007. Rhule was there as an assistant at the time, or
at the end of it. Yeah. So
yeah,
Al Golden came in after 05. Temple was terrible. Like, maybe you should think about shutting down the program kind of terrible.
Yeah.
When Phil Simpson came in as a player, and then Al Golden took over after the 05 season, and he brought Matt Rhule, and things started to turn around. So yeah. Phil was a part of all of that.
And then in his coaching career, after he was done playing, coached in the Miami area for several years, had a bunch of success, was the Miami Herald Coach of the Year in 2021. Then Matt Rhule brought him up to Nebraska on his initial staff as a staffer, quality control, in 2023, where he helped recruit a bunch of Miami guys, Ja'Cory Barney and Willis McGahee and Vincent Shavers and Larry Tarver and Amari Sanders. And that's a pretty good haul right there. Then Simpson leaves for Florida State in 2024 to be a defensive assistant. And then as both staffs change over again, he returns from Florida State to Nebraska. So Nebraska gets him in the trade for all those assistants and players that they lost. So it's been an interesting sort of run for him over the last several years, but this is a guy that people are familiar with in the room already. And it's another one, Mitch, that I think, coaches look at and they say, this guy's, he's got some chops here. There's some upside with Phil Simpson.
Yeah. Interesting thing about him is he was gone, but not forgotten in 2024. And I heard from people in the Nebraska community who were hopeful that Nebraska could get him back on the staff. And I kind of thought, well, he left, he went back to Florida. Like, I'm not sure the circumstances that sent him back to Florida, but he probably wanted to be, closer to his home base.
Right. Like after
South
1
Florida.
year at Nebraska, like he spent 1 year at Nebraska, and that's the outlier of his entire life,
Yeah, right. And there was still, like, people were thinking about him, like, look at all those players that he helped bring in. Plus he was a quality control coach in 2023, like made quite an impression because of the ties that he had and has in South Florida and what he was able to do, the kind of talent. It's not like Nebraska just brought in 5 guys from Miami. Like, you can go to any high school and find 5 guys at Miami that are probably going to look okay in a recruiting class. But the benefit of having somebody like Phil Simpson, who knows those high school coaches and in some cases coached these players and coached against them, is that he knows their personalities and what's going to work. And it takes a unique kind of player from Miami, Dade County, that area, to come to Lincoln, Nebraska and be able to thrive as a football player. And the fact that all 5 of those players are still here a year later, and it's as simple as that, just still here a year later. And at least 3 of them, I'd say even 4, played important roles on Nebraska's football team as true freshmen. It speaks to Phil Simpson's, not just his talent evaluation, but like his instinct and like character evaluation in knowing what might work at Nebraska, which is quite a statement because he had never been to Nebraska, at least to live in Nebraska. So he did come back. Nebraska got him, as you said, in that swap with Florida State, as Tony White and Terrence Knighton went to the Seminoles. And I want to know what he's going to do. I want to know what they're going to do with this. I mean, he's not coming back in the same role. He's not coming back in QC and to help with recruiting in Florida. He'll help with recruiting in Florida for sure, but he's going to coach the outside linebackers.
Yeah.
How many outside linebackers does Nebraska have in its starting lineup? And who are the top guys at that position for Phil Simpson?
Yeah, I mean, there's that. I mean, the piece of the Simpson part that's interesting is that there's some recruiting, nails that are sunk in Miami, and like he's proven himself there. But as far as the coaching side of things, like I mean, there's a lot of inexperience there, and so you're putting a guy in a position that obviously is really, really important, and all the positions on the football field are really important. But you have some guys in your room that have been around for a long time, and I'm curious to see how the mix goes at the linebacker position overall, but outside linebacker in particular. Like how do they sort of work that entire thing, and defensive ends and who ends up where, and they have a lot of flex. Like Dasan McCullough is a guy that comes to mind right away because you could just do so many things with him. Now I know there was some conversation about him, having a home, which is interesting to me. So that's a guy to start with right away.
Yeah, I don't know what that home is yet.
Yeah.
It's not safety. He's not playing. He's going to play linebacker, but is he a stand up in the middle of the defense guy, or are you bringing him in to rush the passer? He's versatile enough to be able to play a number of positions. So I think in the next next couple of weeks before, so after the other new assistant coaches talk to the media next week, we're going to hear from Matt Rhule on Tuesday, March 11th, which is just under 2 weeks before spring practice starts. Nebraska is going to go on spring break as a university and as a football team the week before spring break. And I think by the time we hear from Rhule, we'll have a better sense of what kind of defense Nebraska is going to run, and then who's at the linebacker spot. Like, you need to know the scheme before you know how things are going to work out with personnel and the way that Nebraska lines up at linebacker and on the defensive line. So maybe Simpson will be able to shed some light. Like, he's got Willis McGahee, who is, I think, for certain an outside linebacker in this system. He played the jack spot last year, and that may be this. He may go right back to that if Nebraska has a jack, or they'll have something that does the same thing that the jack did in Tony White's system. So, yeah, I'm intrigued by who's there. Can Javen Wright go out there and play? They have Maverick Noonan as a young guy who had a knee injury in his first year and then didn't get on the field much last season. So is it time for him to be able to blossom? The other new linebacker is Marcus Watson Trent from Georgia Southern. I think he's an inside linebacker. He's built more like that.
Yeah,
but we'll see. We'll see what their plans are for all of these.
Yeah,
all these new players and old.
Yeah, there's a large sort of mix there. So it'll be good to get some particulars on exactly what he's working with and who he's working with on a daily basis. One more guy to get to. He is, in my opinion, the most interesting, and that's Phil Snow. We'll ask him some questions next.
Welcome back. Last segment of a Wednesday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Mitch Sherman, Connor Happer with you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, don't forget we're on all the audio platforms too. So go check us out, download the show, do whatever you do with your podcast, but we're there on Apple, Spotify, everywhere else. Appreciate everybody tuning in through these months of January and February. We're about to hit March. We got a mailbag show on Friday, which will be our last episode in the month of February. And then once you get to March, there's a lot going on. Spring football, you got March Madness. So thanks for staying with us through these months of the off season. So back to our conversation about Nebraska's new assistant coaches on Wednesday, late morning in Lincoln. We're going to hear from Daikiel Shorts. We're going to hear from Phil Simpson. We're going to hear from Phil Snow. This is like the slow rollout towards spring practice. Nebraska will make its other 3 new assistant coaches available to the media next Tuesday. And then a week after that, we'll hear from head coach Matt Rhule. So Phil Snow, little bit of background on him. From Northern California, played at Cal State Hayward. He's 69 years old. Came out of retirement for this job, although he did work as a defensive analyst for the Chicago Bears after he left the Carolina Panthers, or the Carolina Panthers made him leave at the end of 2022. So he has stayed in the game and served as a consultant for Nebraska and Matt Rhule over the last couple seasons, more so in the 2024 season, even more so late in the 2024 season when things got dicey as Nebraska went on a losing streak in October and into November. So Rhule considers Phil Snow to be one of the most important influences in his rise, in Rhule's rise as a coach. Snow was the DC for Rhule at Temple, Baylor, and with the Panthers. Snow previously coordinated defenses at Washington, UCLA. UCLA is where he met Rhule in 2001, when that was Rhule's first one of his first jobs, right there at the beginning as he was getting into coaching. And then Snow was the DC at Arizona State, where he played a couple games, more than 2, but there were a couple very notable games in the mid-90s. 95, Nebraska hung 77 points on the Sun Devils at Memorial Stadium. Pretty good Nebraska team that year. And then with Scott Frost as the quarterback in 96. Arizona State and Phil Snow's defense beat Nebraska. Pat Tillman, Jake Plummer, 19-0. The most recent time the Huskers were shut out. Still today, a streak that lives on.
Yeah, crazy. Insane that there's a connection to that game on this staff. It feels like there always has to be a connection to that game on the Nebraska staff, I guess. Scott Frost could never stop talking about that game when he was the head coach here. Oh, people hated me, but after that game,
Yeah, now you got the other side of it.
Yeah.
Now maybe this is what Nebraska needed. This is another curse killer. Nebraska now has hired the defensive coordinator who shut them out.
That's the way to go.
29 years ago.
We got to find some more names that were involved in that game and just, go down the list and start hiring them over the years.
I'm sure Jake Plummer's ready to roll, right?
Yeah, Jake the Snake. He's got some business ventures. I think he's doing some things out there. Yeah, maybe down the line a little bit. Okay, so Phil Snow is fascinating. The way that I'm viewing him is just like a Rhule proxy, basically, like an arm of Matt Rhule. I mean, the reverence that Matt Rhule has for Phil Snow is apparent and obvious. And there's the title of Phil's what is Phil Snow's title? It is
associate head coach.
Associate head coach, and then they're putting him in charge of a position, right?
Yeah, he's gonna help Terry Braden with the defensive line. I mean, he's gonna take the outside guys, the edge rushers.
I don't know.
Seemingly.
That's kind of how I view that as well. So the power structure is fascinating. I think you have a defensive coordinator and Job Butler, you have Phil Snow there, you have Matt Rhule. Between those three, those are kind of the heads of the defense, I think, for Nebraska. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it goes to Rhule at the top, but I don't know. As Rhule sort of backs into a CEO role, he brings in Phil Snow as a guy who understands exactly what he wants and how his brain works. And I feel like that's a really, really important spot on the staff.
Yeah, if Matt Rhule could create a second Matt Rhule, I think he would have him do everything that Phil Snow is doing. 100%. He would be like in an advisory role to the defensive coordinator. He could help run searches for assistant coaches when there was an opening on the staff. And that's what Phil Snow did in helping Nebraska connect with Mike Eckler and ultimately hire him as the special teams coordinator. And he could go to spots on the defense where there was a young coach who, say, had been in the NFL and hadn't spent a lot of time around college players and be an asset at that position group, which is what Snow's doing on the D line with Terry Braden.
Yeah. All right. So if you're asking questions today, what are you dropping on him right away?
So you think that I could pull off the just say they'll probably have us introduce ourselves because it'll be the first time that we've interacted with Phil Snow in this kind of a role. So Keith Mann will say, "All right, guys, if you can say your names and your affiliations when we call on you, that'd be great." So I'll say, Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. What would you say you do here? Would anybody get it?
People have seen doing that face, right? We don't know if Phil Snow has a sense of humor. But that is the question. Like, what's a day look like for Phil Snow? And I don't know what the answer would be. Maybe he would respond like, who is the guy that was shouting about how he had people skills and he works with people.
Yeah, I don't know that guy's name in the show or in the movie, but he said Phil Snow could say, "I deal with Coach Rhule so the other coaches don't have to. I have people skills. Can't you understand that?" He would never do that. That would never happen.
Tom Simkowski, I believe. People skills. I work with the people. Yeah,
there's a lot more to that conversation about the customers and what he does and how he's got a secretary and he doesn't actually take the reports to the customers. They fax them. But, Phil, that would be too much to ask of Phil Snow. All of this would be too much to ask of Phil Snow. And Tom Simkowski is viewed in that movie. He's like the downsizers are here and they're getting rid of him. Like that's not Phil Snow's like an essential part of he's a key cog in the operation at Nebraska. We're just making light of this because it's a position that hasn't existed in Lincoln before. And Nebraska's added 3 full-time assistant coaches. It was at 10, like every other school before this season. And now the Huskers have 13 assistant coaches. So if you're going to have 3 more assistant coaches, and two of these coaches we're talking to today are in new spots. If you're going to have these extra people around in well-paid, important positions, like get the most out of them. Like there's an efficiency. There's an efficiency index that could be calculated on who's making the most of their new positions. I'd be curious too, like just to look around the Big Ten and see like where's Ohio State at, like where's Purdue at in terms of the number of full-time coaches. And that's a little bit difficult to gauge because you start getting into those stats and it's hard to know like, well, okay, who's really an on-field coach or not an on-field coach? Like, could you call Jamar Mosey that at Nebraska, even though he doesn't have one of these traditional titles? Maybe you could. So it's not apples and apples everywhere, but Phil Snow's definitely one of those guys where like get the most out of him because you haven't had this luxury in the past.
Well, I do think there's like a warning out there right now with the unlimited amount of coaches that these schools could hire and the amount of money that they're spending on staffs now. Like you do have to be careful to like you have to find that right number for efficiency.
Oh yeah, you can go overboard.
Yeah, you don't want to get too bloated because then you got people, doing the same job and you just have a high paid staff for the sake of having a high paid staff. Like Nebraska has a pretty high paid staff right now. So it'll be fascinating to see in this first year sort of how they feel about how it went after the year and the responsibilities and how they're divvied out and stuff like that.
I think that's where the NFL experience that Nebraska has can come in, especially on the defensive side with Snow and Butler and Terry Braden, is that these guys have been around staffs that are the size of what Nebraska has, or even bigger in some cases. So they know how the give and take works and you don't step on somebody's toes. Like you can make the most out of having a coach to player ratio that's a lot different from what Nebraska's had in the past. Hey, think about it. It's a drastic change. There's a lot of drastic changes going on, but Nebraska went from 10 coaches for 150 players in 2024 to now 13 coaches plus 13 coaches, in name, maybe more like 14 or 15 coaches for 105 players that you're going to have on the roster in 2025. So you can have more personal attention with players and how they sort that out, like how they make that work in real time, and whether it's on the practice field or in the office is something that it will benefit them to have the experience of to be able to tap into the experience that John Butler has from his time in the NFL. Snow's been elsewhere in the NFL beyond just his time in Chicago and Carolina. And the same thing with Brad.
All right. So we'll have all that to recap tomorrow. It would be funny if at the end of the press conference, Phil Snow came out and he presented a jump to conclusions, Matt. But we do not expect that to happen. That was the ultimate end of Tom Simikowski's character arc after he was nailed by a car backing out of his driveway. He made the jump to conclusions Matt. And yeah, so it all worked out for him at the end.
Did Tom Simic, is he the guy that then was in a wheelchair and they went to a pool party with him? Yeah. Yes. Okay. It's coming back to me.
That's right. Okay. You got it. All right. Thanks for making Locked On your first listen today. Go for your second listen. You can check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast with Isaac and Andy. Don't wait for March. Be the most informed college basketball fan right now. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.